Picture this. You've been handed a piece of paper. The ink faded and the corners curled. It's a deed. A deed to a house. A forgotten structure on the sun-scorched edge of a town that God himself seems to have forgotten. The lawyer, a man with dust in the creases of his eyes, told you its official worth was $25. The price of a decent bottle of whiskey and a bad night's sleep. You've had plenty of both. Your name is Elias Vance, and this crumbling inheritance is all that's left of a distant relative you never knew. It is, you think with a humor as dry as the dirt beneath your boots, a kingdom of dust and splinters. You walk for 2 miles under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, the deed of fragile promise in your pocket. There it is, a skeletal frame against the horizon, its windows like vacant eyes. The door hangs on a single, groaning hinge. You push it open, expecting the scuttling of rats and the smell of decay. Instead, you are met with silence. A different kind of silence. One that is held, not empty. And then you see them. In every room, figures move with a quiet, ghost-like purpose. In the main room, a woman kneels, scrubbing the warped floorboards with a wet rag, her long black braid trailing down her back. In the small alcove that might have been a kitchen, another polishes a tarnished pot, her reflection a blur of weary concentration. Through a doorway you see a third, mending a tear in a piece of burlap with thread so fine it's nearly invisible. They are Chinese women. A dozen of them, maybe more, their faces etched with a story you cannot read, their movements a synchronized ballet of servitude. They stop, one by one, their heads lift, and a dozen pairs of dark, almond-shaped eyes fix on you. They are not hostile. They are not curious. They are terrified. The air crackles with their fear, a living thing that presses in on you, heavier than the midday heat. The $25 house is not empty. It's full of secrets. And in that moment, standing on the threshold between your solitary, broken world and theirs, you are faced with a choice that will unravel everything you thought you were. You can turn around, walk away, and leave them to their ghosts. Or you can step inside. Elias stepped inside. The door groaned shut behind him, the sound of a final decision. He was a man carved from hardship, his face a roadmap of battles fought both on the frontier and within his own soul. A scar, a pale white line running from the corner of his left eye down to his jaw, was a permanent reminder of a life that had taken far more than it had given. He had come here seeking emptiness, a place where his ghosts could finally rest. Instead, he had found a house full of them, flesh and blood. He said nothing, simply stood there, his large frame filling the doorway. The women remained frozen, their eyes wide. One of them, slightly older than the others, took a hesitant step forward. She was small, but her spine was straight, her gaze direct despite the tremor in her hands. "You, new master?" she asked, her English fragile, each word a carefully placed stone across a rushing river. Elias's brow furrowed. The word master landed like a punch to his gut. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble unused to conversation. "My name is Elias Vance. I was given this house." The woman's name was Mei Lin. She became their reluctant voice, translating his words into the swift, soft currents of their own tongue. The story she told him was a simple, brutal one. They were bound, indentured to Silas Croft, the town's mayor, a man whose smile was as wide and false as a painted backdrop. He had paid for their passage from a land of famine to this supposed paradise, and now they owed him a debt that grew larger with every sunrise. This house was their barracks and their workshop, where they toiled endlessly, laundering clothes, mending linens, and cooking for his businesses, their labor lining his pockets while they subsisted on scraps. They were his property, worth far more to him than the $25 the county had assigned to the rotting wood that sheltered them. Days bled into a week. Elias didn't know what to do. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to find the solitude he craved, to not get involved in a fight that wasn't his. But he couldn't. He saw the quiet resilience in Mei Lin's eyes, the weary hope in the faces of the others. He saw the way they cared for each other, sharing their meager rations, tending to one another's blisters. He saw a strength he hadn't felt in himself for years. So he stayed. He didn't speak much. His actions became his language. He began by fixing the broken hinge on the front door, the solid thud of it closing properly, a small but significant victory against the world. He repaired the leaky roof, the rhythmic tapping of his hammer a new heartbeat for the house. He dug a new well, his muscles straining against the unforgiving earth until he struck clean, cool water. He would leave sacks of flour and potatoes on the porch, hunted rabbits hanging from a nail, never waiting for a thank you. He would sit on the porch steps as the sun bled across the horizon, sharpening his knife, a silent guardian. And slowly, the fear in their eyes began to recede, replaced by a tentative curiosity. The house began to change. The women, seeing his labor, redoubled their own. They weren't just cleaning for a master anymore. They were nurturing a home. They scrubbed the floors until the wood gleamed with a soft, honeyed light. They patched the walls and washed the windows, letting in the golden afternoon sun. Mei Lin found a crate of old seeds and, with the others, tilled a small patch of hard-packed dirt beside the house. They coaxed green life from the barren soil, shoots of beans and squash that were promises of a different future. The silence in the house transformed. It was no longer the heavy silence of fear, but the comfortable silence of shared purpose. Sometimes, it was broken by the soft murmur of their language, or even, on a rare occasion, a fleeting whisper of laughter that sounded as fragile and beautiful as a bird's wing. One evening, Elias sat on the porch, watching the stars prick the velvet darkness. The door opened behind him. It was Mei Lin. She held out a steaming bowl. It was a simple stew, made from the rabbit he'd caught and the first tender vegetables from their garden. He took it without a word. She did not leave, but sat on the step below him, her presence a quiet question. "Why you do this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For us, Elias stared into the vast, lonely expanse of the night sky. He thought of the men he'd lost, the promises he'd broken, the man he was supposed to have been. "Because no one should be property," he said, the words rough, as if pulled from a deep, abandoned well within him. "Everyone deserves a place to be safe." Mei Lin nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. It was the first time he had seen any of them cry. In that shared stillness, under the silent witness of the stars, a fragile bridge of trust was built between the solitary, wounded soldier and the captive women. The derelict house was no longer a prison or a simple shelter. It was becoming a sanctuary, and in building it for them, Elias was unknowingly rebuilding himself. But sanctuaries are fragile things, and the world outside the fence posts had not forgotten them. The slow, warm burn of their new life was about to be met with an explosion of fire and fury. The storm arrived not in the sky, but on horseback. Two men, their faces hardened by cruelty and cheap whiskey, reined in their horses, kicking up clouds of red dust that choked the air. They were Silas Croft's men, the enforcers of his will, their presence a poison seeping into the fragile peace of the homestead. Elias met them on the porch, his stance wide, his hands empty but coiled into fists at his sides. He was a mountain, immovable and silent. "The mayor sent us," the first man sneered, his eyes flicking past Elias to the women who had gathered fearfully in the doorway. "His property ain't been productive lately. He's come to collect his assets." Elias's voice was dangerously low, a growl that promised violence. "They're not assets, and they're not going anywhere." The second man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "This ain't your concern, Vance. You're just squatting on Croft's land. The house, the land, the women. It's all his." He made a move to push past Elias, but Elias's arm shot out, his hand clamping around the man's wrist like a band of steel. The man's eyes widened in pain and surprise. The fight was short and brutal. Elias moved with a grim efficiency that spoke of a dark past, a dance of violence he had long tried to forget. He was outnumbered, but he was fueled by a righteous fury he hadn't felt in a decade. He was not just defending a house, he was defending a home. He was defending them. He sent the men packing, bruised and bleeding, with a final, chilling message. Tell Croft, he spat, his chest heaving, to come himself if he wants them. Tell him I'll be waiting. The victory was hollow. The sanctuary had been breached. That night, a new kind of fear settled over the house, colder and sharper than before. The women huddled together, their whispers like the rustling of dry leaves. Elias stood watch on the porch, the old rifle he kept from the war resting across his knees. He knew this was just the beginning. Croft was not a man who tolerated defiance. A few days later he came, but Silas Croft was too clever for a simple brawl. He didn't bring thugs, he brought the law. He rode up in a polished buggy, the town sheriff, a man named Peters with a weary face and a tarnished badge, riding beside him. A crowd of townsfolk followed at a distance, drawn by the promise of drama. Croft stepped down from his buggy, a sheaf of papers in his hand. He was dressed in a fine suit, his face beaming with a benevolent, sickening smile. "Elias," he boomed, as if greeting an old friend. "I believe you have something of mine." He held up the papers. "Contracts," he announced to the crowd. "Signed and sealed. These women are indentured to me. They are my legal responsibility, my investment in the prosperity of this fine town. Mr. Vance here, in his misguided charity, is interfering with a lawful business arrangement. He is, in fact, stealing." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Elias, he's got the paperwork. My hands are tied." It was a perfectly laid trap. Croft had turned Elias from a protector into a criminal. The hope that had blossomed in the small house began to wither under the harsh glare of corrupt legality. Elias felt a familiar, cold despair creep into his heart. He had failed them. He could fight thugs, but he couldn't fight the law, even a twisted version of it. The women stood behind him on the porch, their faces pale masks of resignation. This was it. The dream was over. Croft smiled, savoring his victory. "Sheriff, kindly escort my workers back to town." But then, something happened that no one expected. As Sheriff Peters took a reluctant step forward, Maylin stepped past Elias. She stood on the top step, small and trembling, yet her voice, when it came, was clear and strong, cutting through the tense silence. "It is not a debt," she said, her English steady and resolute. "It is a cage." She looked directly at the crowd, her eyes burning with a truth that could no longer be contained. "He calls us his investment. I will show you his returns." With a steady hand, she pulled back the collar of her worn dress, revealing a dark, ugly bruise spreading across her shoulder. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Another woman stepped forward, then another, each silently revealing a mark of Croft's cruelty. A scar on an arm, the ghost of a burn on a hand. They didn't need to speak. Their bodies told the story. Maylin's voice rose, filled with a power born of desperation and newfound courage. "We work from before the sun rises until long after it sets. We are given barely enough food to survive. We are locked in at night. This is not work. It is slavery," the crowd murmured, their gazes shifting from the women to the suddenly sweating Mayor Croft. His painted smile began to crack. "Lies. Hysterical nonsense from ungrateful wretches," he sputtered. Elias looked at Maylin, his heart swelling with a fierce pride. She had taken the spark of safety he had given her and ignited a fire. He knew what he had to do. He stepped forward, standing beside her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. He emptied its contents into his hand. A handful of coins, the last of his army pay, the sum total of his worldly wealth. "Mr. Croft," Elias said, his voice ringing with authority, "you claim this is a matter of business, a debt. Then let's settle it." He strode over to the mayor and thrust the coins into his chest. "Here, this is all I have. Consider their debt paid." It was a pittance. It was nothing compared to the fictional sums on Croft's contracts. But it wasn't about the money. It was a symbolic act, a moral gauntlet thrown down in front of the entire town. "You want to pretend this is about business? Then this is my bid for their freedom." The crowd stared, breathless. Sheriff Peters looked at the coins, then at the women's faces, then at the panicked, guilty eyes of his mayor. He saw the truth, stark and undeniable. He had a choice: uphold a corrupt law or stand for what was right. He slowly unpinned the tarnished badge from his chest and held it in his palm, as if weighing it. Then he pinned it back on, his movements deliberate, his spine a little straighter. He turned to Croft. "Silas," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "I think your business in this town is concluded. Get in your buggy and go." Croft's face turned purple with rage. He saw his power, built on fear and lies, crumbling to dust. He looked at the faces in the crowd, no longer fearful, but filled with contempt. He snatched the coins, a final act of greed, and scrambled into his buggy, whipping his horse into a frantic gallop away from the town, away from the ruin of his reputation. A cheer went up from the crowd. The tension broke like a fever. The women on the porch wept openly, but these were tears of relief, of disbelief, of freedom. They rushed forward, surrounding Elias and Maylin, a swirling eddy of gratitude and joy. The $25 house had survived its storm. It was no longer a prison, no longer just a sanctuary. It was now and forever a home. The townsfolk, ashamed of their long silence, brought gifts: baskets of food, tools, bolts of cloth. They had witnessed an act of profound courage, and it had awakened their own. In the weeks that followed, the house on the edge of town became a landmark of hope. The garden expanded, thriving under so many caring hands. The sound of real, unrestrained laughter often drifted out of its open windows. Elias Vance, the solitary soldier who had sought emptiness, found his life filled to the brim. He had not found a place to let his ghosts rest. He had found a family that helped him live with them. He was no longer just Elias. He was their protector, their brother, their friend. He had been gifted a house worth $25 and found a treasure beyond any price. What is the true value of a home? Is it measured in dollars and cents, in wood and nails? Or is it measured in the safety it offers, the hope it nurtures, and the love it contains? Elias Vance was given a property deemed almost worthless, but he discovered its immeasurable value when he chose to open not just the door, but his heart. He was faced with a choice that day: to turn his back on the suffering of others or to stand for something, even if it cost him everything. He chose to stand. And in doing so, he didn't just save them, he saved himself. We are all, at some point, faced with a similar choice. We see injustice, we see fear, we see people in need. It's easier to walk away, to say it's not our problem. But what if it is? What if the true measure of our own humanity is found in those moments when we refuse to close the door? If the story of courage and the creation of an unlikely family resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Elias's position? Your engagement helps us to continue bringing stories like this to light. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales of resilience, hope, and the enduring power of the human spirit.